The Shawl at Thornhaven. The fog came early that autumn to Thornhaven, and it came the way fog always came there, slow and gray, rolling off the harbor before dawn to wrap itself around the fish sheds and the crooked lane behind the chapel, before anyone woke to see it arrive. The air smelled of tar and brine and wood smoke. 3 smells that told anyone born there exactly which season it was without a word said. It was the kind of damp that got into bone and stayed. Clara Marrow knew that damp better than she knew her own reflection, because she owned no looking-glass worth the name and had stopped seeking her face in windows some months before. She was not a woman a room noticed. Small, quiet, quick with a needle, the sort of person a shopkeeper had to ask twice for her name and then still wrote it down wrong. She mended sailcloth for 3 families along the quay and took in fine embroidery when the parson's wife could spare it. Her hands were rough and often bled at the cuticle from the salt air, and she had made her peace with that the way she had made her peace with most things that winter. She had buried a husband in the spring, a fisherman named Peter, drowned off the Cardonwick rocks in a squall that took 2 other boats besides his. And she had buried a son 6 weeks past, a boy not yet 3 months old, who had simply stopped breathing one night the way small things sometimes did, without warning, without a reason anyone could give her that she was willing to accept. She did not speak of either loss. She had learned that people wanted her grief only so they could arrange their faces into sympathy and then be done with the arranging, and she had no patience left for managing anyone's comfort but her own, and not much for that either. She rose before light and worked until her eyes ached by candle stub, telling herself most nights that she would have done whatever came next for anyone, before she even knew what it would be. It happened on a Sunday after chapel, when she had gone down to the old net house at the harbor's end to fetch a bundle of drying twine she had left there before the funeral. The net house was long disused, its floor sound enough for storage and nothing more. She heard the crying before she saw anything, thin, furious, worn thin with its own effort, the sound of a creature that had been at it a long while and no longer expected an answer. She had made that sound herself once into a pillow, so the neighbors would not hear a widow break in the night. She followed it behind a stack of old lobster pots, where someone had left a basket wedged into the dry corner, and in the basket was an infant, weeks old at most, wrapped in a shawl gone thin with wear, its lips a color she did not like the look of at all. There was no note. There was no one on the road. There was only the tide going about its business and the fog thickening with the light going out of the sky. She stood over that basket the length of one long breath, and in that breath something in her chest that had been shut since the spring opened again, not gently. She did not think about the parish, or what a widow in her position ought to do about a strange foundling with no name and no kin. She picked the child up. It was that simple, and it was not simple at all. Her arms remembered a weight they had held 6 weeks before and had not held since, and for a moment she could not breathe around it, and then she made herself breathe, because the thing in her arms could not wait on her grief to settle itself. She carried it into the dry corner, out of the wind, and did what her body had not forgotten how to do, though her mind had told her every day since the funeral it would never be asked again. She fed the child, and it stopped its crying and began, instead, to feed. She sang under her breath, not because she thought anyone wanted a song, but because it was what her own mother had done for her once, in a kitchen she no longer had. She did not know, sitting there in the near dark, that she was not alone. A man stood in the gap of a broken shutter, where he had stood some minutes already without a sound. He wore a plain riding coat with no crest on it, and mud to the knee, and he had come off the coast road on foot, leading a tired horse, meaning only to shelter from the wind an hour before riding on to the house he did not want to reach. He was near 40, with a face that had once been called striking by people paid to say so, and had since gone hollow around the eyes in a way that no longer suited the word. He had not slept a full night in a fortnight. He had a daughter at home who would not feed, who was wasting in the arms of nurses who wept because they could do nothing, and he had ridden out because he could not sit one more hour in that house listening to it. He watched the woman in the net house feed a child that could not possibly be hers, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the season. She did not know he was there. She did not sing for him or for God, or for anyone who would ever know she had sung at all. She sang because the child needed it, and there was no one to see that she gave it. He did not call out. He did not offer coin or his name. He only watched the way a man watches something he had stopped believing existed. And then, before full dark, he led his horse quietly back to the road and rode on toward the house where his own daughter lay failing, and did not look back. She did not know then that the stranger at the shutter had a name half the county spoke with its hat off. She did not know his steward would be asking careful questions in the village within the week, about a woman who could nurse an infant and want nothing said of it after. She only knew, rising at last with the foundling asleep and warmer than she had found it, that she could not leave it at the net house, and could not take it to the parish without questions she was not willing to answer. So she wrapped it deeper into the thin shawl, the very one her own son had worn his last cold week, and carried it home through the fog like something she had every right to carry, though she knew the law would not agree. She named it privately, for no one's comfort but her own, Wren, because it had been small and gray and easy to overlook, and because a thing needs a name if you mean to love it. At Cardonwick House, for miles inland past the Withy Beds, matters had not improved. The Earl, Julian Ashworth, sat most nights in the nursery himself now, trusting no one else to watch. His daughter, Margaret, not yet 3 months old and motherless since the hour of her birth, would not take milk from any of the 3 wet nurses hired in as many weeks. The last had left that very morning in tears, saying the child seemed to fight the breast itself, as though grief had lodged in her small body before she had words to hold it. Julian had buried his wife, Catherine, that same spring, almost the same week Clara Marrow buried her son, though neither would ever learn the symmetry of it, and had spent every day since behaving as an earl must, upright, correct, dry-eyed before the household, and entirely hollow when the door was shut. He said nothing to his steward of what he had seen at the net house. He said only, the following morning, that inquiries ought to be made in the village for a woman capable of nursing, of good character and discreet, and that his name need not be attached to the asking if it could be helped. His steward, a careful man named Hollis who had served the family 20 years and asked few questions he wasn't paid to, took this at face value, and so the parson of Thornhaven, approached without the least suggestion that his lordship had ever set foot near the harbor that week, gave the only name he could honestly give. He gave Clara's because he knew of no scandal attached to it, and because, he said, she had lately begun to look thinner than a woman managing well ought to look, which the parson took for the mark of a hard winter and nothing more. She did not know, when the summons came to attend at Cardonwick House, that the man who wanted her there had already stood in the dark and watched her feed a child that was not his and would never claim to be. She went on a Tuesday in a borrowed cloak, carrying Wren against her body the whole 4 miles, because she trusted no arrangement she had not made herself, and because she had already decided, without quite admitting it, that if this house wanted her milk it would take the child that needed it too, or it would not have her at all. She was shown, after a long wait in a cold hall hung with portraits older than her own family had ever kept a name, into a room warmer than any she had stood in since her wedding, where a man stood at the window with his back to her, holding an infant that cried in the thin, worn-out way of a creature with little crying left in it. He turned, and she saw his face for the first time in full light, hard-boned, tired, not handsome in the way the word was usually meant, and she dropped the small curtsy expected of her and waited to be told why she had been brought 4 miles in the cold. He did not waste time on ceremony. He crossed the room and held the child out, not as a lord commands a servant, but as a man past pride holding out the last thing he has left to try. Can you nurse her? Just once. If it does no good, I will not ask it of you again. She looked at the child before she looked at his face, because that was always where she looked first. At the one who could not speak for itself. She saw a girl gone pale at the mouth and hollow at the temple, and something in her chest went tight with a grief she recognized far too well. She held out her arms. He laid the child into them with a carefulness that surprised her, the carefulness of a man and used to gentleness and trying very hard to remember how. She sat where she was bid and did what she had done 9 nights before in a ruined net house, without ceremony, without thanks required, because that too, she told herself, was simply what a person did. She heard him let out a breath behind her like a rope going slack after too long pulled taut. When at last she looked up, he stood quite still, one hand over his mouth, watching his daughter feed as though he had not believed until that instant it would happen again. She has not fed since Thursday, he said, his voice gone rough in a way it plainly cost him to allow. She is hungry now, Clara said. That is all. She only needed someone who was not afraid of her. He looked at her the way a man looks at a fact he has been handed and does not yet know what to do with. He did not thank her. He asked her name, and when she gave it, Marrow, plain, no title attached, he repeated it once under his breath as though setting it somewhere he meant to keep it. He asked what wages would answer. She said she wanted none beyond her keep, which was not entirely true, because she had a small fierce condition of her own to state before the hour was out, concerning a child that moment asleep beneath her borrowed cloak. She told him. She did not ask his leave so much as inform him of the fact, the way she told the truth in every circumstance, whether it served her or not. She watched his face for the refusal she was braced to meet. It did not come. He looked at the sleeping foundling a long moment, and something crossed his face she could not read. Something almost like recognition. though she had no way of knowing why a stranger's face should soften at the sight of a child he had never laid eyes on. He said only that the child could stay, that a cradle would be found by nightfall, and that no more need be said of the matter. She settled at Cardonwick House the way water settles into a low place, filling the shape it was given, without announcement. Within a week the nursery had a rhythm built around 2 cradles instead of 1, Margaret's proper and Wren's beside it, because Clara had made it a condition the children never be parted from her reach, and the Earl, to the visible astonishment of his staff, had not argued the point at all. The housekeeper, a broad, dry-voiced woman named Mrs. Hollis, no relation to the steward, though the county never tired of confusing them, took to Clara within the fortnight, in the particular way of women who decide, on very little evidence, that someone is worth the trouble of liking. She brought her tea she hadn't asked for and corrected her on nothing she didn't need correcting on. "You'll wear yourself to a thread, girl," she said once, watching Clara rock both cradles at once with a foot under each. "I have been threadbare a good while now," Clara said. "I see no cause to change the habit." Mrs. Hollis laughed the short bark she gave to very few people in that house. It was Mrs. Hollis, too, who let slip, in the careless way of a woman thinking aloud over her mending, that his lordship had sent the parish doctor to a fisherman's widow in the village some months back, with no name attached, only that a good doctor should look in on her, and that it was the sort of thing his lordship did rather often and never spoke of after. Clara's needle stopped in the cloth. She had been that fisherman's widow. She had been visited in the worst week of the summer by a physician she had not sent for and could not have paid, who had looked at her failing son and done what could be done and left before she thought to ask who had sent him. She had assumed, in her grief, that the parish had simply done its duty for once. She said nothing of this to the Earl. She filed it away quietly, the way she filed away most things that unsettled her, and went on with her work. The Earl came to the nursery most evenings, ostensibly to see his daughter, and stayed rather longer than that errand required. He was not a man who found conversation easy. He asked her plain questions about her husband, about the fishing trade, about how a woman came to know the names of every fever a child could take, and she answered him plainly in turn, without softening any of it for his comfort. To her mild surprise, he did not flinch from the plainness the way most gentry did. "You speak the truth very readily," he said once, watching her settle Wren against her shoulder. "I have found it saves time," she said. "Most people only want the comfortable version. I have none to give." He almost smiled at that. Not quite a smile, more the shape one leaves behind when it has been away a long while and is trying to remember its way back. She noted it the way she noted most things, without comment, though she found herself watching for it again after that. She learned in pieces that his wife had died within the hour of Margaret's birth, that he had been in the room, that he had not, by his own admission one evening when the fire burned low and his guard with it, quite forgiven himself for surviving it while she had not. "You did not cause it," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I have found that knowing a thing and believing it are not the same exercise." "No," she said. "They rarely are." Winter closed in hard after that. Margaret thrived, filled out, took to gripping Clara's finger with a strength that made the household exclaim. Wren thrived beside her, and Clara found, without deciding to find it, that she had begun to be happy in a house that was not hers, in a way she had not expected grief to permit. It could not remain so simple, because a house like Cardonwick held more than an Earl and his housekeeper and 2 thriving children. It held also the Earl's sister, Lady Vane, who had been away in Bath through the whole crisis and returned in the dead of January to find a fisherman's widow installed in her brother's nursery, with a foundling of unknown parentage sleeping 3 feet from the heir presumptive's cousin, and made her opinion of the arrangement known within the hour, in the particular bright, brittle laugh she kept for occasions of great social discomfort to everyone but herself. Lady Vane was not a stupid woman, which made her considerably more dangerous than a foolish one. She deployed her cruelty over the dinner she insisted be laid formally her first evening home, with Clara summoned down against every instinct she possessed. "Marrow," Lady Vane said, turning the name over as though testing a coin for a false stamp. "I don't know it. Is it a Devon name?" "I do not know, my lady," Clara said. "I have never had occasion to ask." "No," Lady Vane said, with a small bright laugh. "I don't suppose you would have. One's people generally do not trouble themselves to remember where they came from, when where they came from is nowhere at all." Clara set her fork down carefully. She did not answer the insult with an insult of her own, because she had decided long before, in a much colder kitchen than this one, that dignity was the one thing poverty could not take from her. "I know precisely where I came from, my lady," she said. "A cottage on Harbour Lane, with a father who mended nets and a mother who mended everything else. I have never been ashamed of the address." There was a silence of the kind that follows a shot gone somewhere its shooter did not expect. Lady Vane's smile did not move, but something behind her eyes recalculated. "How admirably plain," she said. "I am told you nurse the foundling alongside my brother's daughter. One does hope the arrangement is entirely proper." "She was starving in a net house, my lady," Clara said. I did not think propriety was the most urgent question that evening. The Earl, at the head of the table, had said nothing through the whole exchange. His jaw set in a way Clara had come to recognize as a man holding a considerable temper very still. It was only when Lady Vane turned next to Clara's hands, red and roughened where they lay in her lap, remarking that she supposed such hands did the child no harm though they could scarcely be called a lady's, that he spoke at last, in a voice gone very quiet and very final. "Sister," he said, "you will remember that Mrs. Marrow sits at my table as my guest, and that whatever her hands have done, they have done more good in one winter than most in this room have done in a lifetime with softer ones. I will not hear them spoken of again." Lady Vane did not relent for having been rebuked once. She merely changed her weapon. She began a quiet campaign among the upper servants, suggesting that a foundling of no known parentage had no business under the same roof as the Earl's daughter, that questions ought to be asked about a woman who had appeared so conveniently useful so soon after her own child's death. It reached its worst point on a bitter evening in February, when Lady Vane, finding Clara alone in the nursery with both children asleep, remarked in the tone of a woman doing a kindness that she supposed Clara understood the position she was truly in. "He is grateful to you," she said. "Gratitude is a warm thing, and men mistake it easily for something warmer still, particularly men newly widowed and much alone. You would do well not to let yourself believe it is more than that. When he marries again, as he must, you will go back to Harbor Lane with your foundling and your memories, and I should hate for you to have built anything on ground that was never going to hold." Clara said nothing for a long moment, because beneath the cruelty of it was a small cold splinter of sense that found its way in any way and lodged there. She had not let herself examine too closely what she felt when the Earl sat across from her of an evening, or what she felt when he almost smiled. She thanked Lady Vane for her candor in a voice as flat and correct as any she had used, and went on with the evening's work. It was only very late that night, alone with 2 sleeping children and a fire gone to embers, that she allowed herself to sit still and consider what she meant to do about it. She decided, before the fire went out entirely, that she would leave. She had come to nurse a dying child, and the child was no longer dying. Whatever else had grown in the space between those 2 facts belonged to no one's ledger but her own foolish heart. She wrote a note rather than face a leave-taking she did not trust herself to manage dry-eyed, and signed it simply Clara Marrow with no flourish at all. She was folding it when Mrs. Hollis came in, carrying a lamp and wearing the look of a woman who had come to say something and meant to say it whether asked or not. "You mean to run?" Mrs. Hollis said. It was not a question. "Sit down," she said when Clara didn't answer fast enough, "and let an old woman finish what she came to say, and then run if you must, though I'll tell you plainly, I think you a fool for it." Clara sat, and Mrs. Hollis told her the thing that undid, in the space of 10 minutes, everything Lady Vane's fortnight of poison had built. "You think you were sent for by chance. You were not. His lordship saw you at the net house 9 days before ever a soul in this house spoke your name aloud. He rode out alone that night, as he did most nights that month, and he came back changed, and told Mr. Hollis the very next morning to find him a nurse of discreet character, no name attached to the asking. And Mr. Hollis never once thought to wonder why his lordship was so particular about it. I have known that man since he was in short coats, and I know when he is hiding something behind that grave face of his. He watched you feed that foundling in the dark, wanting nothing for it, expecting no one to ever know. And he has been paying the parish quietly for that child's keep since a full week before you ever set foot in this house. And before that, he sent the doctor to your own door in the summer, though he never gave his name for that either, because he does not do these things to be thanked for them. I have kept his secrets 20 years, and I am breaking one now, because I will not watch you throw yourself out of this house over a lie that woman told you out of pure spite." The Earl came to the nursery himself near midnight, having heard from Mrs. Hollis that a note lay folded on the mantel and a woman meant to be gone before light. He found Clara sitting where she had been sitting an hour, the note still in her hand. "You mean to leave?" he said. "I had thought to," she said, "before I knew what I did not know." He came further into the room and stood near the hearth, and for a long moment said nothing at all. "I was at the net house," he said finally, "the night you found the child. I had ridden out because I could not sit in this house one more hour listening to my daughter fail, and knowing nothing I did made any difference to it. I stopped for shelter, and I saw you through a broken shutter, and I watched you feed a starving foundling that was nothing to you, in the cold, with no one there to see it. And you sang to it as though the singing mattered as much as the milk. I did not make myself known. I told myself it was because I was a stranger with mud to my knees and no business frightening a woman alone in the dark. That was true as far as it went. It was not the whole truth. What was the whole truth? She said very quietly. I wanted to see what a person does when they believe no one of any consequence is watching them at all. I have spent years among people who perform their goodness for an audience and collect the credit after. I had begun to believe there was no other kind left in the world. You proved me wrong without knowing you were proving anything because you did not know I was there. And that is the only test I have ever trusted, because it is the only one no one can prepare a face for. She did not answer at once. Her hands in her lap were steady, and she was glad of it. You might have told me, she said, instead of letting me hear it from Mrs. Hollis. After a fortnight of your sister telling me I was a fool to imagine myself anything in this house but useful. I know it, he said. I have no good defense for the silence, except that I did not know how to say it without it sounding like a debt I meant to collect on. I did not want you here because I had watched you. I wanted you here because Margaret needed you, and that much at least was entirely true. And I let the rest stay hidden because I was a coward about it. I am telling you now because I would rather you despise me for the truth than think well of me for a lie. I do not despise you, she said. You may, he said. I will not hold it against you if you do. I came tonight only because I could not let you go believing what my sister told you. Once you know the truth of it, you are free to take that note to the stable in the morning and go, and I will see you and the child settled comfortably wherever you choose, and I will not think less of you for going. I would rather have your honest no than a yes you felt cornered into by gratitude, or by pity for a widower and his motherless girl. She looked at him a long moment, this grave, tired, honest man who had just handed her, unasked, the plainest gift she had ever been given. The freedom to refuse him. You are asking nothing, she said. I am asking nothing tonight, he said. I only wanted the truth between us before you decided anything at all. She sat with that a while, the fire ticking down to nothing, both children asleep 3 feet away, and found that the note in her hand no longer said anything true. She set it unopened into the fire and watched it catch. I am not going before light, she said. Not tomorrow. Not unless you ask me to. I will never ask you to, he said. Spring came to Cardonwick the way it comes everywhere, without asking permission of anyone's grief. Lady Vane, informed by her brother that her welcome depended entirely on her civility to every soul under his roof, departed for Bath a week later and did not trouble the household again that season. The Earl came to the nursery each evening still, but something in the visits had changed its weight, the way a held breath changes once it is finally let out. He no longer pretended the errand was only his daughter. He sat with Clara while she worked and told her, in pieces, more of Catherine and more of the years since, and she let herself look at what she felt directly at last, the way one looks, after long practice, at a bird that has finally come close enough to be seen whole. It was an evening in April, with both children asleep and the window open to air that smelled of new grass instead of fog, that he asked her the only question he had ever asked twice, though the first time had cost him nothing because he had asked it of no one. I want to marry you, he said. I will not press you for an answer tonight or this week or this season if you need it longer. I am not asking because you saved my daughter, though you did. I am asking because you are the most honest person I have ever known, and I would rather live the rest of my life hearing the plain truth from you than be flattered by anyone else for the length of it. She was quiet a moment, turning a spool of thread in her fingers. You will need to hear my terms before I answer anything at all. Name them. I will never be lied to again, she said. Not to spare my feelings, not to keep a peace, however kindly meant. And I will not be a woman kept quiet in a nursery, while the world downstairs decides what I am permitted to say in it. If I am your wife, I will be spoken to as myself in every room of this house, or I will not be your wife at all. Then those are already met, he said, because I have run entirely out of patience for keeping anything from you, and considerably less taste for any room in this house that would ask you to be silent in it. She looked at him a long moment, and then, because there seemed nothing else honest left to say, she said the one word the whole evening had been arranging itself toward. Yes, she said. It is the only word I need. He crossed the small distance between them and knelt, absurdly for an earl, and took her hand and drew the glove from it finger by finger, and pressed his mouth once to her bare knuckles, red still and always would be, and she did not pull the hand away. They were married in June, quietly in the Cardonwick chapel, with Mrs. Hollis weeping openly in the second pew, and both children brought in for the last 5 minutes because Clara would not be married without them in the room. It was a small wedding for an earl, by every account the county gave of it after, and she wore no jewel finer than the plain gold band he set on her finger, and thought, watching the light come through the old glass, that she had never in her life felt richer than she did standing there, married for nothing but herself. A year turned. The fog came early to Cardonwick again, laying its hand on the park the same quiet, thorough way it always had. Clara sat by the nursery fire with Margaret, past her first birthday and sturdy, leaning against her knee half asleep, and Wren beside her in a small chair of her own, formally given the family name that autumn, with no more fuss made of it than a signature and a smile from Mrs. Hollis, who had cried at that too. Julian came in as he always did at that hour and sat and took her bare hand, because she had stopped wearing gloves indoors altogether some months before, and he had never once remarked on it except to say once that he preferred her hands as they were, red at the knuckle and steady, to any smoother pair he had ever held. She reached that evening for the old grey shawl, still kept folded in the mending basket by the fire, worn thin now at every fold, and drew it up over Margaret's shoulders where she had begun to shiver in her sleep. The same shawl that had once wrapped a dying infant in a ruined net house, and a grieving woman's own son before that. And she thought, watching it settle over the child exactly as it had settled over everyone she had ever loved, that some things are given away expecting nothing, and are given back 100-fold regardless, though never to the one who gave them, only to whoever comes after and needs the warmth just as badly. A person's true worth is never measured by what they do when the world is watching. It is measured, always, by what they do when they believe no one of any consequence is watching at all. The end.